Good afternoon, everyone. This is Yvette Kelly with the McSilver Institute, along with the Community Technical Assistance Center, Managed Care Technical Assistance Center, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Coming Home, Working from the Trauma-Informed Perspective with the Justice-Involved Population. Today's webinar is a part of a multi-platform online series entitled 0 Degrees of Separation, the Role of Social Determinants. The McSilver Institute, CTAC, and MCTAC have partnered to launch this multi-platform series to help clinical professionals, community health workers, educators, and policymakers think critically about those social factors that have a direct and indirect impact on an individual's health and mental health. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to orient everyone to the WebEx system so you know how to participate in today's event. Please note that upon joining the webinar, you've been placed on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract others from listening to the presentation today. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to the host, Brianna, who should be able to assist you. You will also have the opportunity to submit questions for the Q&A portion of today's presentation by utilizing the chat box feature, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. If it's not visible, please click the dialog bubble on the top right toolbar and it should appear. In order to ensure that we are able to answer as many questions as time permits, we are requesting that you send in your questions at any point during the webinar, and we will address them during the Q&A portion at the end. The webinar today will discuss the unique challenges associated with individuals who carry the burden of a criminal record. Those with criminal records suffer lifelong consequences, such as barriers to housing, education, employment, among others. These barriers are not only experienced by the individual, but have shown to have devastating consequences for their families as well. This webinar will outline the impact of trauma experienced by this population, explore the various societal factors that often drive crime, and focus on the recovery and restoration process that is essential to make sure that these individuals have the opportunity to succeed once they've paid their debts to society. We are very excited to have Lane Pavey as our presenter today. Lane is a social worker and certified peer counselor. She has a private practice in psychotherapy and is also an EMDR therapy provider, helping individuals and families heal from traumas. I think also important to note is that Lane is a former inmate, and she returned to society in 2011 after serving 20 months in a federal institution. She's the co-owner and CEO of Revive Reentry Services, where she supervises reentry specialists and engages reentering citizens in programs necessary to ensure forward progress. She is a staunch advocate for the formerly incarcerated population and works in community organizing and political advocacy. Lane serves on the executive committee of Smart Justice Spokane and is a co-facilitator with Community Partners in Transition Services and is the founder of I Did the Time, an advocacy group consisting of formerly incarcerated individuals and families. So without further ado, we're going to pass it over to Lane. And once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Lane.
Am I coming through?
I can hear you. Yes,
okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I feel so honored to speak to my fellow social workers. I am 100% convinced that more social workers need to be in the criminal justice system, that we need to be running the criminal justice system, because as you know, the tenets of our practice are to assess, to choose an intervention, and then to evaluate the results of that intervention. And if it didn't work, go back and pick another intervention. And what's very frustrating to me about the criminal justice system is that they fail to do a conclusive assessment. They pick the intervention of shame and incarceration. And as we continue to evaluate those results, we see that recidivism rates are still skyrocketing, still high. People are still segregated. They don't come back to a sense of hope or belonging or a sense that they have an opportunity to move forward from their crime and from the time that they've served. And then we are refusing to sort of pick another intervention, despite the fact that we have not gotten good results from the criminal justice system. And we will talk quite a bit more about that as we go forward. So I would encourage any of you out there who want to work with this population to recognize how important it is to be a social worker, to work from a systems perspective all the way down to the micro level, and to help this population thrive and to work within our communities, within our countries, to ensure that crime is not what's happening happening, and that people can have opportunities before anything bad happens through systemic change to ensure that the criminal justice system is not where people end up any longer. With that said, I'm going to ask a few questions here in the beginning just to get a feel for the audience. Which type of setting best describes where you provide services? And then, yes, we did put the criminal justice system in there. And there will be another slide about if you have ever worked with the justice-involved population. And so these take about 20 seconds for everyone to pull in on, and then I will be able to see the results there and can move to the next slide. And then I also just wanted to ask if you are a person who has ever been impacted by incarceration, or if you have a family member who has, and that's sort of a trick question in that everyone in America is impacted by incarceration. Uh-oh, I didn't get to see the results. Do I go back? How does that work? Sorry, Yvette, I'm messing it up already.
No problem.
No, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Yep, you should be able to click on the tab, the previous tab. Do you see that?
No, but that's okay. This is the one I want to know more than anything, so I'll just leave it up. Our polling?
Well, I can also talk through it a bit. So we had 32% of our audience work in community-based organizations. The next highest percentage works in another setting. And we also have some government-based organizations on and a couple from the criminal justice system.
Thank you so much. Good, a couple from there. That gives me some hope too. And so this is sort of a trick question in that incarceration does impact everyone, but I am asking this question more specifically to know whether or not you are a person who's been justice involved, or if you've been through justice involvement with a family member. Wow, 92, that's great. 92 saying yes, 78 saying no, 4 saying not sure, and that's okay. And I'll go to the next one here. We may talk about what that means. And then just wanted to get a sense for whether or not you have worked with the justice-involved population, either in some kind of case management program, probation, parole, if you've worked at a public defender or prosecutor's office, if you've worked in addiction recovery that had a specific lens for justice involvement, and then juvenile is also really great to work in and pretty popular with social workers. There are more social workers in the juvenile system than the adult systems. But I'm in Spokane, Washington, so it may be completely different on the East Coast. You guys are a little bit more ahead of us. Okay, let's see how that looks. We're just waiting for them to count up the results. Good. Case management, addiction recovery, good. Other, ooh, I'm interested in other. There were 43 that said they worked in other justice-involved areas. 18 in juvenile, or 21 in juvenile. Good, good. Okay. That gives me a sense of everyone's sort of familiarity and you know, what experiences you've seen. So I hope that I speak to some things today that are things that you have seen in the population. So you got some background on me. Essentially, I have 36 hours a week at my private practice open to see people one-on-one for psychotherapy as an EMDR therapy provider. I work in my private practice with people who are involved in probation, who are involved in therapeutic courts. I work with the judges, prosecutors, probation officers, and other collaborative service providers to ensure that people are staying out of jail and are getting chances for recovery, opportunities for recovery as opposed to incarceration. I work with the Smart Justice Campaign in town, leading the kind of ending mass incarceration work at the local level. trying to create more programs for people in county jails. People in county jails have different problems than people in federal and state prisons, and we can talk more about that at a different date. Becoming an EMDR therapy provider has been a great thing. I will let you know that the only reason I am in private practice is because Medicaid will not pay professionals with drug or violent crimes. I have a federal drug crime, and I could not get hired at a public mental health agency. But luckily, because of connections from my church, I was able to work at a very prominent private practice in town, and I do have a license through our Department of Health. I just can't get the agency-affiliated license required to work in public mental health. I also own a reentry service housing business, transitional housing, with 4 other partners who are formerly incarcerated. We are the first reentry housing business owned by formerly incarcerated people in this state, which we think is awesome. And in all of my free time, I work with them, and we emphasize story sharing the same way that we emphasize story sharing in our community advocacy organization, I Did the Time. I'm also a cohort member of Just Leadership USA, which is a national group that works to develop the leadership of formerly incarcerated people, and it's a great experience. If you have anyone that you want to Google that and get people signed up to develop their leadership skills. Reentry was very difficult. I only served 20 months in prison. I had the privilege of moving into my parents' basement, but that was also, just slightly difficult. Families don't know how to handle the person coming back. They're oftentimes very upset at them. They have been supporting them monetarily through their commissary funds. They've been gone the whole time while everyone else has been working hard. And we have this thing in our country where if you've broken a law, we think you should be punished. We think that you're no longer worthy of our compassion and care. And that's difficult for families to deal with the paradox or the dialectic, if you will, of that, because they want to love their family and support them, but their family member and support them, but they don't necessarily know what to do. There's no handbook, and oftentimes family members can be very mad too. So it would be great if you could help facilitate some family reunification when people are returning to their families. I also experienced a lot of panic attacks and nightmares. I would wake up in cold sweats. I actually had olfactory hallucinations where I'd wake up and think food was cooking in prison when it wasn't, and then that continued to happen at home. So naturally, I got very interested in the trauma-informed perspective because I couldn't understand why my body was doing things or why I was having these nightmares when I was free. It didn't seem to be making sense, and I realized that there were a lot of things that were stuck that I was not able to process. And when I went through my own mental health counseling for acute distress, I found the way to heal from those things and wanted to be a psychotherapist. I wanted to be a psychotherapist when I was in prison too. People also feel very alone. And so when I went back to school to get a master's degree, I wanted to just do something to prove to employers that I was worthy of a job that really provided for our community, because I had such a hard time finding a job, any kind of job that was anything more than minimum wage. I worked in fast food joints. Hard labor is oftentimes what people end up having to work coming out. And when I was 27 years old, I was looking down the barrel of my life, realizing that I was not going to get very far if I did not get a higher education. But the good news is it was my second year policy class that made me realize there were 100 million people in America with arrest and conviction records, and that maybe I could do something about that. Maybe I could help my people. Maybe I could change the system as well as work with people individually. And that's what inspired me to continue to be just a staunch advocate for ending mass incarceration and system reform and the people impacted by mass incarceration. So it's important to recognize that those 100 million of us are really like a new minority class. We have our own set of barriers due to having a criminal record, and so it's important to look at us as our own population. Of course, a large majority of our population are people of color, and it needs to be said that Black Lives Matter, and proof that they do not matter in this country is mass incarceration, the war on drugs, the school-to-prison pipeline, mandatory minimums, and if Americans really, really want to say that all lives matter, they really need to start talking about ending these institutions and systems and policies that are tearing apart Black communities. We are spending $80 billion a year, and we are still having huge recidivism rates. There are 2.4 million people incarcerated right now, 97% of whom return to our communities. We come right back out and shop in your grocery stores, and our kids go to school with your kids. And we are tarnished with the stigma of the criminal record the rest of our lives. And the number one factor in determining whether or not someone does reoffend has to do with whether or not we have a job or income, and stable housing is another one. What also is really interesting about the criminal justice system is that it's not really criminal intent that is causing people to commit crimes. It's poor social conditions. And so if we can start to look at the criminal justice system like a symptom of the much larger problem of social injustice in our nation, and this is really where social workers can step in at a systemic level to help reform what's going on, how people are being shut out and marginalized, to ensure that prison isn't what happens when your poor social conditions get in the way of you trying to get your life together. So obviously homelessness, poverty, social location, which does include being a person of color, drug, alcohol addiction, through our communities, undiagnosed and untreated mental illness. In counties, up to 65% of people across the nation have a serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, major depressive disorder, ADHD. These are huge in our population. Of course, dysfunctional family patterns, and then underperforming churches. Churches not willing to work with the justice-involved population. You know, oftentimes they will work with the homeless population, but I don't know what you guys see, but we see churches over here that may help the homeless, but don't want the homeless showing up at their Sunday service, and that is a huge problem, stigma again, and hate. So when people are returning, we oftentimes kind of have this mindset that we just don't know what we're going to do. How am I going to explain this to the world? How am I going to be received by the world? So there's this ruptured sense of belonging, like I'm an outsider, I am marginalized, I shouldn't tell people about this. How do I hide this? I can't hide this. If you Google me, my FBI sentencing report and that mugshot I showed on the first slide comes up. So when I have patients trying to remember my phone number and they Google me, they find my FBI sentencing report. So it's very difficult, even if a person is ever to expunge their record or just isn't getting a background check for a job they're applying for or something like that, we can still get Googled. So forever, we have to learn how to deal with answering questions about our criminal record and presenting ourselves in a way where hopefully our criminal record does not hold us back from some kind of opportunity. We feel very ashamed. We feel bad and broken and unforgivable. But oftentimes we also just feel as if others are going to see us that way. And so we may feel that, you know, we've worked through things and we've restored our sense of self, but we're also just worried about that stigma out there that can come back on us and be used against us at any time in our life for the rest of our lives. We're very lonely. We're not allowed to associate with people with criminal records. That oftentimes is not even workable for people who return to their homes and communities. But for the most part, we're not able to talk about what happened to us and what we're going through. We're very voiceless. We learn helplessness through going out and applying for jobs over and over again, applying for housing over and over again, trying to get opportunities over and over again, and having our criminal record be the thing that holds us back. And then, of course, we may internalize that sense of oppression and think, I guess I don't deserve it. Why bother? And then the other thing you'll see in our population is just a ton of hypervigilance, always looking over our shoulder. Is our PO coming? And if someone does have trauma prior to the prison system, then it could be anybody they're looking over their shoulder for. You will be shocked at how many big, strong men returning from prison have too much anxiety about riding a city bus. They will not ride a city bus. I'm not going to be, packed into a bus with all these people. Social anxiety is a huge symptom of PTSD and a huge symptom of people returning from prison. So I hope that you already noticed that as a symptom. So what a huge barrier to people. If we can't help them get on the bus, how are we going to help them get to that job interview or that job training or the myriad of other services that they're running around town trying to take care of upon reentry? So your job is essentially to help people restore what was lost, what has been lost in their lives. And that is their sense of dignity, their sense of belonging and social inclusion, their sense of hope, helping them restore their family relationships, helping people move from a consumer of services to a fully active citizen in society, getting them registered to vote, helping them understand why, voting matters and how you can organize with other people who have your issues to create change. And then, of course, restoring people's sense of abilities and opportunities, getting with the other programs in town and knowing, in your region and area, who helps felons. Learn your resources. And then the other part is just sort of helping people reintegrate those feelings of guilt and allowing people to heal, helping people to recognize that I'm not saying that you as a person are a bad person. Maybe you've done some things that were harmful, but it doesn't mean that you're bad forever. And that is the quintessential part of recovery, is recognizing that just because I've done bad things doesn't mean I'm bad. I am not my behaviors, and I do not have to define the rest of my life by my criminal record if I don't choose to. I can find other things to define myself by, or many things to define myself by. So helping people figure that out is great. So what's really interesting is that our criminal justice system tries to use shame to change people's hearts, which we know doesn't work as human behavior theorists. The basic psychological motive or cause of violent behavior is the wish to ward off or eliminate feelings of shame and humiliation. As we push people further into shame for their behaviors, especially behaviors that are an outcome of something the person felt they were just trying to survive when they were doing, they feel misunderstood. When our population is shamed, we end up feeling, we rupture that sense of belonging. And so it doesn't matter if I ever learn empathy. And so what the criminal justice system really wants is they really want people in our population to learn to have empathy for maybe the fact that they've done something harmful. But it's much bigger than just the crime. It's our entire lives. We need empathy for ourselves. We need empathy for people who victimized us when we were children. We need empathy in general. But pushing people towards shame makes them cut off and stops them from wanting to even care about having empathy for someone because they don't care about me. And so as a psychotherapist, you are going to be helping people to understand that at least you care. You are somebody who's trying to care about them as a human being with dignity and worth. And when you do that, in the middle of shame and empathy is vulnerability. And you can help people be vulnerable about the things that they know they've done or that people have done to them, and they can start getting to a space where there's some understanding and empathy. That's the overall goal for what people want from our population. So let's talk about trauma. It's important to recognize that trauma is not the event, it's the emotional response to the event. And it impacts our brain chemistry, and it impacts our autonomic nervous system. So there are physiological changes in the body due to witnessing something extremely traumatizing with that extreme emotional reaction at the end. So people can have experienced a lot of things, but it's really the thing that's lingering that we have to get to, and the thing that's lingering is always the way we feel about the event. It's important to recognize that so many people in America are impacted by traumatic experiences or experiences that can be considered traumatic when evaluated. 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child. It's 4 out of 5 women in the prison system, and I believe it's 3 out of 5 men who've been sexually molested. Don't quote me on those stats, I couldn't find them, but I've heard that before. 1 in 4 has been beaten by a parent to the point of leaving marks on the body. 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence. 1/4 of us grew up with an alcoholic relative. And 1 in 8 have witnessed our mother being beaten or hit. So this makes for a country, when you really start to look at us, that we are full of trauma. And some of the systems that people live within are not helping them heal generationally from trauma. And so it's very important as a trauma-informed therapist to be assessing what people have been through in their lives and wondering how that may have impacted them and wondering how perhaps that could be a part of why they are in the criminal justice system. The other thing is there's a huge difference between post-traumatic stress disorder for something you experienced maybe one time in your adulthood, like a car wreck or a fight, and the difference between when you have developmental trauma, when you have developmental abuse, neglect. Neglect in the research shows that it impacts people's emotion regulation brain even more than abuse does. And then when there's incest within families, there's sexual abuse in people's childhoods, it looks like PTSD and it may meet the symptoms for PTSD, but your brain is impacted completely differently than just a one-time trauma that you need help reprocessing. So the foundation of doing this work as a psychotherapist is to properly assess for trauma and to know that there are many types of trauma. So sure, there's what others do to us, but there's also what we see others do to others, what we do to others, and what we do to ourselves. And you're not going to see these listed in the DSM as situations that could be considered traumatic, but they have the same impact on people. And which of these 4 do you believe we were able to process in the criminal justice system? So you may be thinking that what we do to others perhaps gets processed or talked about in the criminal justice system, but the actual answer is that none of these. We are not given access to process any of these. We may be given access to process our drug abuse. We may be in drug substance use classes, but again, drugs are people's solutions to their problems. They are not people's actual problems. So even in the system, when we're actually getting a problem addressed, we're just getting a symptom of a problem actually addressed. And so the biggest injustice in the criminal justice system is the fact that no one is looking at it from this trauma-informed perspective and helping people recognize that there are many ways that we can have traumatic reactions due to many things that we have been through. And we need a chance we need an opportunity to process these things. And of course, what we do to others may seem like the thing, but actually, when you walk into prison, you are told, do not talk about your crime. It is not safe to be vulnerable here. And of course, we all know each other's crimes, and some people even look at each other's paperwork. For the most part, we take people's word for it. But no, we're not getting a chance to really process or pay attention to the fact that we may have caused some harm to ourselves or to others in a certain way. And it needs to be addressed compassionately. So make sure, if you're working with someone who's justice involved, that you are doing a trauma assessment. You can use some evidence-based tools like the PSS, the PCL-5, the CAPS, Clinician-Administered PTSD Scale. All of those can be found at the Veterans website, and I actually listed that in the references at the end, and you can go in and get all those assessment tools, have people take them. The hallmark of the trauma-informed perspective is to ask questions like, what has happened to you versus what is wrong with you? And of course we know that as social workers, but that's kind of the definition of the trauma-informed perspective, is to know that something has happened to someone if they're behaving in a way that seems out of just a usual range of personal integrity. You also need to assess for if they felt safe or loved in their childhood. When you were growing up, who was an adult that you had in your life who you could go to feel safe and loved? You will be shocked how many people say no one. What did you feel the general beliefs were about you from adults? This is where you're going to get the I'm no good, I was a mistake, I'm a troublemaker. So you start to recognize that those feelings of shame jumped in really early in people's lives, and they sort of always felt isolated and marginalized and didn't feel wanted or loved by adults. And then where could you go to feel safe? And you will be shocked at how many people just never felt safe. Just never had a place that they felt safe, which means that their survival brain has been activated most of their life, which means that the brain is strictly looking for threat. It's not looking for joy. It's not looking for attunement to others. It's not able to be creative. It's not able to store memory. So you'll start seeing all these other symptoms that people have due to having long-term traumatic reactions in their life. And then there's a difference between shame and guilt. Help assess and help people recognize that shame is when you think you are bad versus guilt when you're feeling like you've done something bad but you are not bad. This is a timeline I just do with people in the beginning to help put all of those traumatic experiences on all 4 of those levels onto something and help them just sort of, you just draw a line. You can make a Word document for this if you want. And then you see here that the SUD level, subjective units of distress, you can do a positive 10, so it's not really a SUD level, but these were positive feelings, whereas down here these are distressful feelings, and you can help people go through their life and lay out, okay, yes, I was born into domestic violence, and when I look back on that, I have a feeling of about a 6. But I had a little brother, and that was really exciting, so I had an 8. And then I was sexually abused at age 9. That wasn't age 9, you got to put it in here too. And that actually led to me being into foster care. My brother and I split up, whatever it might be. When did drug use begin? What has happened in people's lives? And you start kind of looking at, how distressing each of these things are, and you get a feel for, how distressed this person actually is when they're sitting in your office. And many, many more things than this should go on the scale. This is just sort of a generic example. Having the feds raid your house is disturbing. You'll notice that reentry can also be disturbing and exciting at the same time. The same thing with incarceration. It's disturbing, but maybe that's where I found sobriety, so I'm actually kind of happy about that too. A lot of mixed emotions about the criminal justice system. And if you can just help people feel what they feel and know what they know, that's a great start. So on the left here, these are some DSM examples of what they consider, traumatic events, but you just have to make sure. I would make another questionnaire if I were you to see if any of these things on this side have happened in people's lives. Neglect being the #1 indicator that a person is going to have extreme anxiety and have difficulties functioning in a myriad of different areas. Abandonment, adoption, foster care situations. Drug abuse can be traumatizing if you've experienced racism. Medication reactions, public humiliation when everything goes out into the newspaper. Betrayal of family members while you were incarcerated who didn't stay around for you. People are very hurt about that. Also, betrayal of your co-defendants who were your friends, were your partners in crime, and people might have snitched on each other, and we have to help people integrate those feelings so that they can move on with their lives without wanting to take revenge. Persuasive coercion is a symptom of the dissociative disorders when people are essentially brainwashed by someone they're being held captive by, or like women are in this situation a lot, or men who are abused by fathers. Gang involvement and gang initiation is extremely traumatizing. We have one of our 23-year-old guys in the house. He was in a coma for 3 months when he was 12 years old due to his gang initiation. And he awoke to the guys who beat him up thinking that they were just there to make sure that he didn't snitch on them, but really they were there welcoming him into the gang. So he's been through a lot. His brother was shot in their own home at 16 years old, and he has nightmares, and he has trouble sleeping, and he has trouble concentrating in school that he's trying to move forward in his life. And so you just start to see a lot of these things. And then, of course, shame. Shame causes trauma. The other interesting thing is that trauma is about bad things that happen to us that shouldn't have happened, but attachment and safety and encouragement and love from a good caregiver are good things that should have happened to help us move forward with our developmental needs, but they didn't necessarily happen. So you need to be assessing for both. Traumas that occur in relationships are more difficult to heal, and the most common traumas in women and children occur at the hands of their partners, parents or intimate partners. So that's something to assess for sure. It's important that people recognize that trauma is a natural response to these disturbing events and help them normalize and validate that. We call them trauma adaptations as opposed to calling them trauma symptoms. Symptoms has sort of a negative connotation, and it helps people recognize that what's happening to them is a normal thing to be happening. And of course, it's really important that you do a really great introductory psychoed on the brain and trauma with people, because it helps with the cognitive restructuring. It helps them start looking at what's happening to them differently and having some hope that they're okay, lifts their shame, and helps them recognize there's a treatment. So what is the job of the trauma-informed therapist? After your clients make their treatment plan, their client-centered treatment plan goals with you, this is sort of the underlying flow of how you can help people work through the goals that they've identified with you. Number one, normalizing those trauma adaptations through psychoeducation. And I put a ton of slides on here for you guys that I use in my practice every day with my clients that I will not be able to cover in this. I could come back and spend a whole other hour talking about the psychoed for the brain and trauma, but we don't have time for that here. The next thing is you want to help teach people self-regulation skills so that they can learn how to calm themselves down. They can realize they can, and one of the most important things for that is helping them learn how to relax their body. If they are in a relaxed body, even if their threat response does go off in their brain and that amygdala drops that adrenaline into their nervous system, if the body is relaxed, it will send a message back up to the brain that there really is not a threat. And so you can go ahead and relax brain, calm down amygdala. You don't have to be going off because I'm not tensing myself up in order to fight or flight. The next thing is you need to help people lay traumatic memories and the reenactments to rest. What that means is people have a tendency to continue to go into situations that they were traumatized by and reenact them, and they're doing it subconsciously, almost in a trance state. And they're doing it with the hope of attempting to get a different outcome, to feel empowered, to win something over, whatever it might be. But you'll see people reenact trauma relationships and trauma situations like drug abuse over and over and over again. And this is where you use your trauma processing interventions. Cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure therapy are great. They are approved and evidence-based, but I am here to tell you as an EMDR therapist, and they are not paying me to say this, that EMDR is the only intervention that works with the body's natural healing system that tries to resolve trauma towards an integrated sense of understanding of this being in the past, and that I lived, and that I can have hope to change myself today, to do something different for myself today. So I just see people coming out of EMDR therapy, I see their brains start to heal. I see them start to open up to joy and creativity and attunement to others and safety and belonging. So I highly recommend you become an EMDR therapist. And then you really need to connect people with their fellow men and women. Get them out to their community members so that they can heal in the context of community with people who are open and accepting what they've been through because they've been through it themselves. And then very, very important is to advocate on behalf of your clients to keep them in the recovery process. they are going to fail a UA, they're going to miss a meeting with their probation officer. But if they have a mental health clinician in their pocket and you can write a letter to that judge or that PO or whatever it might be, saying like why this person needs to stay in treatment and not go back to jail and how this would interrupt progress, they listen to us. So that's one of the best parts of my job, is that I can write a letter and say this person needs to be in treatment, and they're willing to be in treatment 2 more days a week with me or whatever it might be to keep them in their recovery process, as opposed to send them to incarceration, which does nothing. And then, you know, allow your clients to teach you something if you don't know about the criminal justice system. Let them share their stories. Ask them about it. What was it like? What's this? What's the culture of it like? I'm going to start skipping some of these, but these are in, these slides are in The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It's a book that you can get. I highly recommend it if you're going to be a trauma therapist. These are also 2 main responses to trauma. This is what the brain looks like on fight or flight, and then of course freeze or faint. And this is dissociation, and dissociation normally is indicative of childhood neglect. And these are people who are not very activated. They're not fighting or flighting. They are shut down. They are depressed. They are numb. This is harder to heal than the fight or flight response. It takes a longer time. And there's a really great explanation of using your hand as a brain in Dan Siegel's Mindsight book, which is also in the references, to help you kind of explain how the brain develops from the bottom up and how it can get stuck in these responses. The other part of the body that's impacted by trauma is the autonomic nervous system. When that threat response in the brain and the amygdala drops the adrenaline and cortisol and norepinephrine into the nervous system, you'll start to see the system become sympathetic to threat. So it went from being calm and relaxed to all of these different things happening. And it's important to recognize that that fight or flight response is there to protect us and help people recognize that this is just your body's attempt to protect you, to give you the energy that you may need to fight or flight, because it believes you are being threatened. But what interrupts trauma? What interrupts trauma is actually shame. Interrupting trauma recovery is actually shame. And so there are 2 different kinds of trauma, traumas of agency or traumas of shame. And traumas of agency are a little bit easier to heal. It's normally when other people do something to you where you definitely feel like, yeah, it wasn't my fault. That person was really a bad person and I was maybe in the wrong place at the wrong time, but it wasn't my fault. Whereas traumas of shame are when the victim is made to feel the blame. And so that's rape, that's childhood abuse, that's coercive persuasion by parents on children, and then of course prison. When you have a fault, but shame is not the answer, and so you're trying to help people recognize that they can overcome some of the labels sort of put on them that are causing them to feel terrible. So shame blocks access to the context that is necessary for us to recover. We numb, and then we re-experience or relive traumatic events through the retelling of our traumatic stories. So oftentimes if people are stuck in a cycle, you're able to sort of ask them, you know, how is this story that you're telling that you keep getting into something that's traumatic that you seem sort of locked in? How is you going out using drugs or self-harming a retelling of what has happened to you in your life? And shame erodes the part of us that makes us believe that we can change. That's by Brené Brown. I definitely recommend reading some of her books too. She does a lot of research on shame and vulnerability. So I'm going to skip a little bit here so I have time for some questions. Some of these slides are very self-explanatory, but essentially therapeutic relationship is everything. Attunement to someone is everything. People heal in the context of relationships, and our relationships, our attachment bonds are our greatest protection against threat. So as long as the therapist is able to provide a safe, secure, nurturing, and protective relationship, what you see over and over in recovery stories is people talking about that one person who believed in me, that one person who I knew cared, that one person who helped me believe in myself. So that is your job, is to provide that relationship. You may be the only person in their life that provides that relationship. Also, getting into community is what helps recovery. There is nothing one cannot heal from within the space of an accepting, non-judgmental community. And victims and offenders are oftentimes denied healing within the context of community because we're shipped away and not allowed to talk to maybe a victim of a crime. And so when it's not talked about, recovery does not happen. Overall, the biggest sense of what keeps us thriving and hopeful is whether or not we belong. Helping people to restore their sense of belonging is also part of your job, that you belong and you fit in this community or that community or this group or this organization or wherever. You belong on this earth. Helping people feel like they belong is a huge part of healing. So why belonging is important is because if you don't belong, then you are isolated and marginalized. You're an outsider, and that feels shameful. And when you own something, when you belong to something, you actually feel a sense of ownership in it. And this is what activates and motivates people to want to build and nurture their lives and their families and their relationships. And the last slide I'm going to talk about here is, okay, restorative justice. If you can get people restoring and talking about harm that's been done, they are able to heal. And tying this into the title of the presentation of coming home. In the trauma-informed perspective, feeling at home is feeling safe, is feeling loved. Love is the security that's produced by experiencing nurturing acceptance and guidance towards autonomous development. When people in our population are able to feel this sense of nurturing acceptance and love, they feel a sense of security, they feel a sense of home, they feel a sense of belonging, they feel a sense of safety. And when people are able to have access to this, they will stop going to prison, they will stop using drugs, they will stop getting stuck in systems. And no pressure, but it's totally on you guys to help with this, because I truly believe that you guys are the ones who can help people stop these cycles in their lives and help them heal forever. Thank you very much. I am open to any questions at this point, and there are additional slides attached to this that are kind of self-explanatory that you can use in your practice as well with the psychoeducation part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lane, for that presentation. And just so everybody knows, the slides will be made available on our website, www.ctechny.com. They'll be available by end of day tomorrow, along with the recording of the presentation. So now, Lane, we have a couple questions that have come in. So I'll start off with this one. As a primary behavioral health providers, care managers, social workers, etc., we're trying to begin to address the social factors / determinants to lower recidivism and facilitate re-entry. What happens when people are reluctant to receive help? How do we help those who are not ready to receive help or may be in denial?
You have to get them to peers. You have to get them to people who they've seen, who have gone through this and made it through it. You need to get people who are justice involved into your agency, leaders in the community, to come in and talk to people. They will talk to people who have similar experiences to them. You're absolutely right. People are going to feel like you're just part of another system, and so why should I trust you? And why should I talk to you about anything that I've been through? That's why building that relationship is very important, but oftentimes it may take outside help. Meeting people where they're at means helping them get to a peer and accept sometimes that it's not you that's going to get it out of them.
Great, thank you. Okay, so another question we have. Please comment on the rates of traumatic brain injury before and during incarceration and the relative importance of screening for it and incorporating cognitive remediation strategies and psychoeducation into treatment.
Very important to assess these things. Yes, people who have traumatic brain injuries, depending on where it is in your brain, you are going to have impulsive behaviors, you're going to have memory issues, you're going to look maybe if you have some kind of hallucination disorder, psychotic disorder. And so if we're not assessing for these things, we're not going to know how to effectively treat, right? And so, and there's also evidence that shows that traumatic experiences flood the brain so sharply and quickly in that startle response that it is traumatic to the brain as well. So even trauma can be considered psychological and emotional trauma can be considered a traumatic brain injury as well. So yes, again, assess, 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 absolutely. As far as cognitive interventions, you're dealing with the part of the brain that activates when the cognitive part is shut off. So I'm not a huge fan of cognitive interventions if we're not focusing on where people are feeling impulses. But again, EMDR helps work with some of those sensory experiences and impulses and startle responses that people have. It works to help desensitize those responses. But TBI is a completely different animal to be working with.
Thank you. Okay, another question we have. I feel my therapeutic relationship is compromised by parole or probation. How do you navigate that?
You kind of have to play both sides. I mean, there's a part of you that has to recognize that in order to maintain a good relationship with probation and parole, you have to be helping them, you know, to understand that you're helping this person in an evidence-based way and that you're ensuring that this person is working on the things that will help them not reoffend, because all probation and parole are worried about is public safety and whether or not this person is going to hurt other people. But when you're working with your client, you can kind of play that off a little bit and be like, you know, this is about what you've experienced and why you're having some of the behaviors you may have. But we can leave the crime aside. Like, let's talk about your childhood. Let's talk about helping you make some sense out of why you may have done what you've done. So you kind of need to be an advocate, and you kind of need to side with the client. You have to show them that you're sort of on their side, on the side of healing, on the side of recovery, on the side of caring about them to nurture them back to health or whatever it might be, and then just talk to the POs, because they're not smarter than you. This is what you got to know. POs are not smarter than you. They do not have better interventions than you. You are smarter than them. Sorry if there's POs on there. I hope you're a smart PO because you're also an MSW. But what I'm trying to say is you know better than them what an appropriate intervention is, but you don't have to tell them that. You just go back to your interventions. You'll be fine. That's where I'm at with that.
Great, thanks. Okay, so another question we have there been any inroads regarding the need to add the trauma of the prison experience into the mental health field, like the DSM-5? I've read about the post-incarceration syndrome, which includes PTSD as a major part.
Wow, that's great. I have not actually seen research on that. I do know that imprisonment is listed as one of the traumatic experiences on some of the scales. But that can mean imprisonment like being locked in a basement as a child or a prisoner of war. You often get that box checked and you go, okay, what kind of imprisonment have you experienced? But no, I think that would be great, because the anxiety that people come out with is just so intense. And it can be attributed to being institutionalized and changing. It's kind of an adjustment disorder, but if you have developmental trauma, it's all of that all together. So yeah, gotta properly assess. I would love to see something like that in the DSM.
Great, thanks. So another one we have here is, what are your feelings for self-disclosure for a social worker or mental health professional?
Well, because I've been through it, I oftentimes do disclose, and like I said, again, it's about disclosing for the client. What's the benefit for the client? So I know if I'm working with a justice-involved client that if I say I did time in prison, I have an immediate bond with that person, and I can rattle off something about the culture, and I'm able to let them know. And there's really no hiding it. I think probably about half of my patients know, and the other half are survivors of sexual abuse whose offender, may have been someone who went to jail, and it's kind of a difficult conversation to navigate. But I've also been through addiction recovery, and I will share about that. And for the most part, having a shared experience with someone helps them not feel judged. And people have told me, it helps me know that you're not perfect and that I should just feel ashamed in front of you and beneath you all the time. So I'm really big on personal disclosure if you can find the right way to tell your story in a way that will benefit the client's trust for you in this working relationship.
Great, thank you. So another question we have, bear with me, it's a bit long. What is the role of the mental health provider in advocating for clients' social, economic, and health needs? Do you think therapists should be providing case management services like assistance with parole, probation, housing, employment? If a person is overwhelmed by these systems, there is no way they can begin to address their traumas. Their current situation is often traumatic.
Yes, you have to kind of go on that Maslow's hierarchy and get their case management needs met. I absolutely believe that you should be collaborating with the case manager, or just if you're working at a public mental health agency, you can bill for case management. So you're sitting in sessions, making phone calls, calling people, calling providers, figuring out where you're supposed to go next, helping people organize a document of the addresses and phone numbers of the places they need to go, checking in with the probation officer or whatever it might be with the person. They oftentimes will not have cell phones. They may need to make calls in your office. Yes, take care of all of that for people. Help them get a solid foundation underneath them. And oftentimes in some jurisdictions, there's actually like an office of reentry or something like that where you're supposed to be able to go for all of your reentry needs. That's not happening over here all the time.
I'm sorry, Lane, we lost the end of that sentence. If you could just repeat what you said.
Sometimes there's a one-stop shop. It isn't just for a big one. Oh, there isn't a one-stop for services. Oh, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. We lost the end of that last thought. If you could just repeat yourself, I believe it was the last thought that you shared.
Yeah, if there isn't a one-stop shop for social services for the justice-involved population, I recommend that you create one. I recommend that you start a nonprofit and go for that, or that you create a coalition that works together and meets once a month to discuss collaborating on services. That's what our Community Partners and Transition Services group does. It's all the service providers for the justice-involved population. Maybe there is one in your area. Go find it, go be a part of it, get permission from your boss to get off work to be at that meeting.
Great, and then we have one last question. What are a client's options if they feel that the counselor provider is not providing information and resources they need, especially regarding housing, employment? Those are really the main issues when trying to re-enter society. So the question is,
they have the right. Yeah, I mean, they have the right to get a different counselor, or they have the right to just find a different service provider. Their PO should be able to help with resources. And social workers should be able to have access to those things. And if not, you can sit there in session and just call around. It's more helpful than anything to people to just know that you're trying to figure it out and find it for them, or help them find it too. But I mean, yeah, if you don't have all the options, just information for people, I recommend going out and finding it and finding the organization who has it, or just at least knowing you can refer someone to another organization, which of course is a big hassle, but if people really want information, they will seek it out.
Great, thank you, Lane. So again, everybody, these are the references that Lane mentioned during the presentation. Again, the presentation slides will be made available by end of day tomorrow on ctacny.com. If you have any questions about the presentation for Lane or for CTAC, please email ctac.info@nyu.edu, and we'll be sure those questions get to Lane. And then lastly, we just wanted to review some upcoming webinars offered by CTAC. Tomorrow we'll be hosting Beyond Speaking Spanish, Cultural Competency with Spanish-Speaking Communities. This webinar will be in Spanish, so we hope that you can join. You can register using our website, ctacny.com. Also, Trauma-Informed Collaboration on July 27th on the Trauma-Informed Care Series page on www.ctacny.com. And again, Lane, I just wanted to thank you for this amazing presentation, and we hope you can join us again.
Thank you. It was great. Thanks so much for listening to me, everyone, and go out there and help some people. Thanks so much.